Welcome to another suggestion review, and today, we're taking a look at two suggestions that have to do with Megami. One is a Chimera Shadow Garden suggestion that both has a lot of thought put into it, and a lot of effort, with a really amazing showcase to go alongside it. The other is a suggestion that wants to replace Shadow Swarm, and gives 4 different move ideas for it. Before we review these suggestions though, make sure to subscribe for more JGS suggestion reviews and information. Now, let's get into the video. The first suggestion comes from Roblox champ 11012, who has an idea for Chimera Shadow Garden that he made a showcase for, which I'll show here. It looks great. Well, let's explain the actual effects of the domain now. The domain will only work inside of other domains, and it has the effect of heavily reducing the sure hit effect of any domain expansion. It gets activated by using Mahoraga twice inside of the domain, and it has a pretty big list of effects. First, the Megami user's moveset gets reverted to their base temporarily, with small modifications to their moves while the domain is open. In addition to this, the sure hit effect of the enemy domain is heavily nerfed, meaning that Gojo's domain wouldn't be a full stun, Sukuna would deal less damage, etc. Megami gets increased defense while using Chimera Shadow Garden, and if the domain caster enters his radius, they'll be slowed down and will also deal less damage. When the Megami takes a certain amount of damage, Chimera Shadow Garden will close, and his 4th move will be put on a cooldown, albeit a reduced one. This means that using Chimera Shadow Garden doesn't prevent the user from also following up with a Mahoraga. It just forces a bit of a delay. While Chimera Shadow Garden is active, Megami will be kept inside the area by an invisible force field, restricting his movement a bit and preventing him from exiting the radius of Chimera Shadow Garden. As for the buffs Megami gets, Toad and Nue get replaced with smaller shadow variants, whatever that means, Divine Dog gets removed, and rabbits work the exact same way, but spawn more rabbits, which really just means more damage from the move if it isn't blocked. Also, to address the Gojo problem, Megami can activate Chimera Shadow Garden during the domain cutscene, which is there because he obviously can't use moves during Gojo's domain. Now that the suggestions have been explained, let's review it. First, there's a bit of an argument to be made that this could be a little bit too overpowered. While it's not a full negation of the domain effect, and the domain caster isn't necessarily punished for letting the domain, it still stands that this basically saves the Megami user from what would otherwise be certain death without any huge penalty. So I'd say that the move should put Mahoraga on a permanent cooldown instead of just a temporary one, since this is basically saving Megami from certain death. Other than that, depending on how strong the sure hit negation is, it could be really good or really bad. For example, take Mahito. Megami being limited into a smaller area might actually work against him in Mahito's domain, and let Mahito easily pop him like a balloon. It also would make him a bit of a sitting duck against some characters with AoE high damage moves, and let Sukuna land a free world cutting slash, Gojo land a free Hollow Purple or Lapse Blue, and other stuff like that. It's not a bad way to balance it out, but it could be a potential problem if Megami has no way to get out of his own domain if he needs to escape for a dodge or something. There also aren't a lot of specifications on the enhanced shadow moves, which is a little bit unfortunate. They could make up for Megami being stuck in his domain by letting him keep people away through zoning. Other than that, the slowdown effect is probably not going to matter at all. Pretty much every awakening isn't reliant on movement speed to catch people at a close distance, and instead have a wide array of long-range moves to attack with. Gojo can Lapse Blue, Hakari can use pretty much any of his moves except his first one, and Sukuna can use all 3 versions of Dismantle or pretty much everything except for his grab. Mahito doesn't have that, sure, but as I said before, Megami being trapped will make up for that, and really, only Megami who has a subpar awakening, and Mahoraga, who is actually melee focused, are going to suffer from a slowdown. For my final thoughts on the suggestion, it's just pretty cool, I'd say. It's a simple concept of the sure hit negation thing, but I like that it opts for making it a niche counter tool, rather than trying to give Megami another generic domain expansion like the other characters, which wouldn't really work when he's already got Mahoraga at this point. It's an interesting idea to give him a unique gimmick in negating domain effects, and it also increases his ability to play with teams and let him pull off those anime moments where he saves people from a domain expansion by negating the sure hit effect, like he did against Dagon. To those who are about to say that he can already do that with Shadow Swarm, you forget that it's a one-way trip, and that while he can let people out or in, he can't get out himself. And for my most important thoughts, the Chimera Shadow Garden creation that the author made looks amazing. Even if the suggestion itself isn't flawless, there's no denying that it looks great. And honestly, like something that Z himself would make. I respect all of the effort the author put into this, and they did a really great job overall. Now for the next suggestion we're reviewing, let's take a look at Subspace Tripmind's ideas for replacing Shadow Swarm, which is quite the change. Now, they say that Shadow Swarm doesn't fit Megumi's Awakening, and though they don't say why, I understand their reasoning a little bit. Shadow Swarm as a move does kind of suck on its own. It does low damage and has too much startup to ever work in neutral, meaning that it has to be comboed into, which, for an Awakening move, is a huge weakness that normally is compensated for by high payoff, something Shadow Swarm doesn't have. However, I will say that it's not too hard to confirm Shadow Swarm by throwing out a Rabbit Escape to prevent your opponent from dashing, and it does set you up for a lot of other moves with its Ragdoll on Fling. It's fair to want it to be replaced, but being completely realistic, that's not happening. Z is not taking all the time to replace the move, and it's not a big enough issue that it needs to be replaced, nor even an objectively bad thing. Shadow Swarm has its uses and its place in Megumi's kits. However, even if the suggestion has basically zero chance of happening, let's look at their alternatives for fun. Piercing Ox is basically a pseudo Hollow Purple. It breaks domain and obstacles, and accelerates in speed, as well as increasing in damage as it goes on. It can also track players if the Megumi user points at someone, though it can't turn around. If the Ox goes over a hole, it'll fall like Max Elephant. The move does 20 damage minimum and 80 damage maximum. First, the tracking is kind of dangerous territory. I can see it working if it's just something that forces you to time your dash to the side, and not significantly powerful tracking, but if it isn't that, then it breaks the whole thing or doesn't exist. If the tracking is too strong, then it makes this move completely unavoidable, and the flip side of that is tracking that basically doesn't exist. It's just a hard thing to work with when you're pairing it with a move that cannot be stopped. And let's talk about some other stuff, because you can confirm into this with Rabbit Escape, which could potentially lead to some really stupid damage numbers that are really unfair, since you can't dodge while you're affected by Rabbit Escape. Other than that, the move seems decently balanced, and it could probably be comboed into fairly easily with something like Nue, or maybe even 4-on-1s. I can't really see the max damage ever happening in a real fight though. After that is Collapsing Hounds, and I'll say it right off the bat, this is terribly designed. It's so ridiculously busted that I can't even fathom the kind of thought process that created it. The move spawns 5 Hounds that deal 10 damage each, and Ragdoll, meaning that this already does 50 damage on hit, since the Ragdoll would probably confirm each Hound into each other. So it's already Malhoraga World Slash damage for a lock-on move that seems easy to combo into. But what's even worse is the on-block effect. If it gets blocked, it stuns the target for 10 seconds, which is so unbelievably stupid. 10 seconds is such a long period of time that would let Megumi quite literally land every single one of his moves back to back. Forget letting a user follow up with an ability, this lets him follow up with all of them. Also, the fact that it's a lock-on means that you can't avoid it at all, because you get hurt whether you let yourself be hit or try to block it. You technically can't even counter it, since the fact that it summons 5 Hounds means that if you counter one, you'll just be hit by the others. So there's quite literally zero way to avoid this. It's so unbelievably broken in both damage and effects that I'm utterly baffled at the lack of balance here. It's a real brain fart moment, and any other words about this would just be bullying, so I'm moving on. Round Deer is their third idea. It's a full heal that kind of doubles as invincibility, since it says it gives the user a Hikari effect, and it also gives them a 1.5 times damage buff, but it has a trade-off of not moving with the user, meaning it's more of a totem than anything else. It's sort of okay, sort of not. Hikari healing is a bit too fast for this to be balanced. It would basically let Megumi go from the brink of death to full health with just the press of the button in 3 seconds, so that needs to be ditched. The damage boost is interesting though, but it'd need to be set up with Toad to actually get any value. Anyways, the bottom line is that the idea is fine, except for the Hikari healing. It'd need to be nerfed into the ground if this was ever to be balanced. Finally, there's the idea for Chimera Shadow Garden, and I'll be brief here. It's an open domain that slows people, disables their block and jump, and makes them take damage when they move. Their moves have no cooldowns, but the user is forced into their base, though they can switch back to their ult for a third of their ult. To be honest, I don't like this idea. It's a very boring way to make Megumi's domain, in my opinion, and while it certainly is as strong as you'd expect a domain to be, realistically, all the opponent is going to be doing is sitting through an infinite Toad combo over and over again. There's legitimately no counterplay to this, since you can't block, so if the Megumi decides to Toad, there's nothing you can do against it. and while I can see Nue and Rabbit Escape with no cooldowns being a little bit funny, it's not optimal since you'll just be knocking your opponent out of the way with Nue, and you'll probably get more damage by just going for the Toad infinite combo that this domain would create. It's boring because there's no counterplay at all, unlike Sukuna, who at least lets you block, or Mahito, who in the past lets you run. On top of that, Megumi already has Mahoraga as an ult, so he doesn't really need a second one. The author made it open saying that people can escape, but that's not happening since they'll just get toaded back in infinite comboed. This is not a good Chimera Shadow Garden idea, and like the author's second and third ideas, I don't think they thought it through enough. When you pile on a ton of different effects, there's a really high chance that they synergize in some way that completely breaks it, and that's what seems to have happened here. With that, this round of suggestion reviews is done. The theme here was Megumi, and well, there are some definitely interesting ideas here. The first one definitely has a lot of effort put into it, with the showcase, which was a real treat for the eyes. And while I can't say that it's flawless, it at least doesn't overstep its boundaries or try to fully change Megumi's ult with a new move. It gives him something extra for a very niche situation. The second one is very questionable. It wants to replace a move that's already decently well established, and while the Piercing Ox idea is alright, everything else is ridiculously overtuned and just flat out broken. With some balancing and redesigning of the numbers though, I think it can be fixed. The suggestion just doesn't work in its current state though. Anyways, that's all for today. If you enjoyed watching the video, then please consider subscribing if you haven't already for more JJS content. And I'll see you next time in another video. I'm Noob Eternally, have a great day, and bye.